I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Gro Brundtland, who is currently the Vice Chair of the United Nations Foundation. Formerly, she was the Special Envoy on Climate Change for United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and a member of the Secretary General's high-level panel on global sustainability that aimed to create a new blueprint for achieving low-carbon prosperity in the 21st century. She has a very interesting history. At the age of 41, she was appointed Prime Minister of Norway and was the youngest person and first woman to ever hold that office. She is serving in that position in the 1980s and 1990s. She was the head of the Norwegian government for more than 10 years. A medical doctor who also earned a master's degree in public health. Dr. Brundtland spent 10 years as a physician and scientist in the Norwegian public health system. And for more than 20 years, she served in the public office and was elected Director General of the World Health Organization, and in 1998, where her many skills as a doctor, politician, activist, and management came together. Throughout her political career, Dr. Brundtland has developed a growing concern for issues of global significance. With her strong belief in the link between health and the environment, she became Norway's first Minister of the Environment in 1994. So I think you'll all agree this is an incredible life experience, and we're so lucky that she's here with us today to share those experiences, and she's going to be talking about climate change and our common future. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Gro Brundtland.
Thank you so much. Sally, you know what I wondered when I entered the room? I wondered, are we saving energy or are we wasting it in this room? I had to put on a woolen scarf because the degree of air condition here is much more than any of our bodies need for health reasons. Okay? Think about it. The wind is blowing in the room, yeah? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be with you today to address this important symposium. Stanford is one of the world's great academic institutions, and I particularly admire its leadership on climate and energy, from Sally Benson's program here to Chris Field's exemplary management of Working Group 2 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so much more that is happening here. I had the benefit of learning more yesterday during my visit here. You are leaders who see the interrelationships of global systems and think on a planetary scale. This has been an overarching theme of my own career. Many people and ideas shaped who I am, what I think, and what I have done. But the concept I always come back to is the need for a holistic approach, an integrated and interdisciplinary approach to society, cultures, the economy, and the environment. Once, more than 20 years ago, during my time as Prime Minister, I had an intense and difficult exchange with an opposition leader in the Norwegian Parliament during so-called question time. In my final response, I just exclaimed, "Yes, all is indeed linked to everything else." At that time, 20 years ago, this final statement from me as Prime Minister was immediately criticized by the opposition, even ridiculed by some, for being evasive and unclear. Interestingly, today, it is often quoted with great respect, even with admiration. So think about it. What happened in those 20 years? It's an optimistic sign, in my opinion, that you've had this turn of understanding of the linkages globally. This profound realization that everything is connected, and therefore that we need to have an integrated approach and a holistic approach to our great challenges, may be rooted in my own training as a physician. That's when I came to understand fully the links between the humans, the communities and societies that we create, as well as with the environment in which we all live. This approach is also public health at its best, to think in those terms, and it is preventive medicine at its core. I understood that this approach should also guide our relationship with nature, humanity's relationship with our planet. I think this perspective also is part of the reason why 3 decades ago I was called upon by the Secretary General of the United Nations to create and lead an independent commission to address major global challenges: threats to the environment and natural resources, increasing population pressures, poverty, and lack of development. For the first time, we were in fact asked and tasked with assessing the world's most critical challenges, not in isolation one by one, but in an integrated, holistic manner. In our report, Our Common Future, we warned, and let me just say, as we planned that period of 3 years of intense work, we knew we had to base ourselves on linking up with educational and academic institutions, with science, with NGOs, with a broad range of actors on the global scene. Now, in the report, Our Common Future, we warned that the global threats that were already underway, this was 1987 when the report came: climate change, desertification, forest degradation, water scarcity, declining biodiversity, and increasing dependence on dirty and dangerous sources of energy were not only unsustainable, but posed a grave threat to the well-being and security of future generations. I believe that for the first time in human history, we seriously have to confront the responsibility for the destiny also of all future generations, not just our own. And this was one of the new things that got to people when that report came out. The fact that in historic times, it was really basically enough to think about what happened to your present situation, your present generations, in order to be responsibly taking care of issues. This is no longer the case, and in human thinking, it's a new historic reality. So, since that time in 1987, while the world has improved in some areas, such as the gradual healing of the ozone layer, environmental degradation continues, and in some cases is accelerating. So I think in this room we all know we now urgently need to step up the pace of change. In the last years, 5 years or so, as we have seen economies wobble, ecosystems under siege, and inequality within and between countries increases, we need to realize that these are symptoms that share a root cause, where short-sighted and often narrow interests have superseded common interests, common responsibilities, and common sense. The only durable solutions to today's crisis are those that also position us technologically, socially, and politically to solve our longer-term problems. And that means finding opportunities and summoning the resources, even in trying times as these, to make the most of them. The UN Secretary General has made sustainable development a top priority for his second 5-year term. His high-level panel on global sustainability, on which I had the honor to serve, presented our report in 2011 ahead of Rio +20. We made clear that the current global development model is unsustainable. We can no longer assume that our collective actions will not trigger tipping points as environmental thresholds are breached, risking irreversible damage to both ecosystems and to human communities. We all need to recognize that the drivers of the sustainability challenge include unsustainable lifestyles, production and consumption patterns, and the impact of population growth. Now, these few words I just mentioned now took that international panel a lot of effort and debate to make that conclusion. You know, even mentioning the fact that growing population is an issue in itself was hard to get agreement about. And I'm proud that we managed to capture in that international 22 panel members to dare to say even that fact. As the global population grows from 7 billion to 9 billion by 2040, with the emergence of 3 billion new middle-class consumers over the next 20 years, the demand for resources will rise exponentially. By 2030, the world will need at least 50% more food, 45% more energy, and 30% more water, all at a time when environmental thresholds are throwing up new limits to supply. These thresholds are most clear when you look at climate change, which affects all aspects of human and planetary health. We now need to take seriously the challenge both to measure and to price what matters. The marketplace must reflect the full ecological and human costs of economic decisions and establish price signals that make transparent the consequences both of our actions and of our inactions. Number one, pollution, including carbon emissions, can no longer be free. Secondly, subsidies should be made transparent and phased out for fossil fuels by 2020. We must build new ways to measure development beyond GDP. That's a hard one, but it needs to be done. And of course, in all of this, science must point the way to more informed and integrated decision-making, not only on climate change, but also on biodiversity, ocean and coastal management, water and food scarcities, as well as planetary boundaries, defining the scientific thresholds that can set a safe operating space for humanity. Now, throughout the 20th century, economic growth was measured by the accumulation of physical, financial, and human capital, without regard to changes in natural capital and without taking social risks into account. In the 21st century, the goal must be a green economy, one that can generate economic growth and improvements in people's lives without harming the environment. This means taking advantage of the vast potential to maximize resource productivity, especially with respect to energy and to water, and reducing waste. It means investing in sustainable technologies that will create jobs and support the poor, improve health and education, and build more resilient and equitable societies. This transformation to a green economy, an inclusive one, will generate millions of jobs, and it will raise millions of people out of poverty. I also want to make very clear something that I think is too much forgotten. It also requires investing in women. I believe the next increment of global growth could come from the full economic empowerment of women. Half of humankind's collective intelligence and capacity is a resource we can no longer afford to lose out on. We must now stop all discrimination against girls and women. And there is more of this than any one of us are aware of, I think. By empowering women, we will unleash the largest untapped potential for sustainable development. Now, let me use Norway as an example. In Norway, it is clear that a policy of inclusiveness, investing in all of our people, combined with sound resource management policies, was the strategy that led to continuous and sustainable growth. Women are indeed a vital force for growth and sustainable development. And we know companies and countries with higher levels of gender equality have faster growth and better performance. A recent analysis found, and I need you to listen very carefully because it's really unbelievable. The very high participation of women in the workforce in my country, Norway, the addition that creates only from the average of the OECD countries, the added participation of women in Norway's economy is a bigger part of the production, our GDP, than the whole of the Norwegian oil and petroleum sector. So I think this is important to understand, and it is relevant across the world in all countries where women and girls still are kept down. Energy, of course, and that's a big issue of this conference, lies at the heart of every country's core interests, from job creation to economic competitiveness, from providing cleaner air to empowering women. This is why the Secretary General has focused so strongly on sustainable energy for all. His initiative to help ensure universal access to modern energy services, to double the use of renewable energy, and to double the rate of improvement in energy efficiency, all by 2030. Before I enter further into this, let me also share with you that, because I know it comes later today, on the plane going over here, I was reading the Wall Street Journal, and it has an article with a picture of the Tesla. And it says, tax breaks give Tesla leg up in Norway sales. Now, to me, it was interesting that it says that Tesla Motors is suddenly the #1 car, Model S, is it? Yeah, in Norway, where the government, and this is what the article says, it's using its oil wealth to smooth the way for battery-powered cars. Advocates of electric vehicles point to Norway as a template for what the rest of the world needs to do to jumpstart electric car sales. Electric vehicles in my country are exempted from a 25% value-added tax that in my country can reach tens of thousands of dollars the price of a vehicle. We have very high fuel prices in Norway, nearly $10 a gallon, the highest in Europe. And cars are exempt from road tolls, these electric cars, and they can drive in the bus lanes, avoiding the congestion of rush hours. Now, the interesting thing is, it's quite fascinating. Sales in Norway in August, September have been, this is the #1 car sold in Norway in August, September. And when you compare to Germany, Norway's sale is double in absolute numbers the sales in Germany, the most populated country in Europe. Norway has only 5 million people. Now then, I have a comment that, this kind of policy, that you have economic policies, tax policies, that inspire what is useful and have disincentives towards bad parts of the economy, that can be done in every country, in any country, not only in an oil-producing country. So that's my comment to the thing that I know that our policies, on paying big taxes on CO2 emissions, etc., over the decades have led to Norway having the highest level of environmentally sound technologies, driving the different parts of our industry, including the oil sector. Now, so I'm going back to the Secretary General's great effort in the energy field, which I find, in addition to his focus on sustainable development and climate change, is really of the essence. It's important that he has taken that lead. Because simply put, development is not possible without energy, and sustainable development is not possible without sustainable energy. 13 years ago, 189 member states of the United Nations adopted what is known as the Millennium Development Goals, goals by which we try to measure human progress. So as we look forward to the new set of goals for the post-2015 development agenda, we should recognize that energy is, as the Secretary General has said, the golden thread that connects development, social inclusion, and environmental protection. So the energy issue has to figure prominently in the post-2015 development goals as well. Access to energy, we all know, is crucial to all people, rich and poor. And it means many things. In fact, yesterday I realized that one of the research projects here have shown that even above having children able to read their school lessons at night, it's even more important for many families that they can see the snakes before they bite in the darkness. So to travel to a job, to keep life-saving vaccines refrigerated, all of these things are basic in human life and communities. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, an estimated 200,000 health clinics have no electricity. I have seen some of those. I have seen women giving birth under such circumstances. And they give birth at night beneath dim and dirty kerosene lamps, a bare candle, or in total darkness. So we know the drama of what we are up against. In the global economy, meanwhile, our appetite for fossil fuels is undiminished, even as the warning signs of a warming planet multiply. So we must do much more at the local, national, and international level to hasten the sustainable energy transition, which is why you are all here, I believe. This requires investment. It requires policies that create incentives for the right kind of investment. Because the market alone cannot spark the changes that are needed. Businesses, investors, activists, and scientists, they cannot alone change the way we produce and use energy. They can anticipate change, they can facilitate it, they will profit from it, but they cannot drive it alone. Business also needs, and business also calls, for government action to inspire innovation and the solutions to reach a sustainable world. It's clear public policies are needed to stimulate markets, to remove barriers, and to level the playing field. It is necessary to establish clear objectives and targets for renewable energy and energy efficiency. Toward that end, I believe we need to undo all old-fashioned policies that create the wrong incentives and keep us locked in unsustainable ways of doing business. A good example is fossil fuel subsidies that our panel addressed, which still exists in many countries, too many countries. In fact, annual subsidies for established fossil fuels are estimated to cost between 350 and 500 billion worldwide, depending on the oil price. These are resources that could be rechanneled to clean, increasingly low-cost, sustainable energy technologies. Now, I'm thinking back to my life experience and to the more than 30 years since I first participated in the World Economic Forum in Davos. The first time I was there was 1979. I was a young environment minister, had started as a young environment minister 74. I was by 79 well known in Europe and partly internationally. I was invited to Davos to speak about quality of life in the 1980s. But I was a flower, you know. I was one woman in that conference speaking about social and environmental issues for the first time. But I was there, I listened to all the men from all the parts of the world. And the scene has changed fundamentally since I first was in Davos. In the last 10 years or so, 15 maybe, there is a different atmosphere. There is more women, more NGOs, more focus on social and environmental realities. And the business community, many of those who are there now, they don't think in terms of business, private sector business is for profit. Governments have to sort out everything else, whether social or environmental. That was the thinking back in the 1980s. Now I can see that this old-fashioned thinking is about to disappear. That the public sector alone cannot be the one responsible for our social goals, our political necessities. Today, good businesses realize that they cannot succeed in societies that fail. That's why some of you are here, because you have understood that you are part of the solution, because we are all in this together, and we need to move together toward the best incentives and disincentives to reach our common goals. So in the last 20, 30 years, there has been a buildup of consciousness about the importance of private-public partnerships, working together to reach these important goals. The latest report by the IPCC's Working Group on Climate Science reaffirms and strengthens our understanding of the challenge. It reminds us that we are likely to overshoot the 2-degree temperature increase the world, in fact, has agreed to as a limit. And that happened in the late hours of the Copenhagen conference in 2009, while leaders in a small room, much smaller than this one, like 1/3 of this one, were sitting together hours after hours, walking the room, working the room, bending over, trying to convince each other that some kind of consensus at the leadership level had to be made in Copenhagen, while the whole conference was completely in shambles. I was in that room, and it was fascinating to see. I was sitting behind the Secretary General. He sat for the whole night, I don't know, 6 hours or more. Your President Obama was moving around in that room. My Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg and others, including Angela Merkel, they were all there trying to find a way to at least make some serious decisions. There was a young Chinese in the Chinese seat. Not one of the Chinese leadership, not from the, from any leadership. He was a young bureaucrat. And his contribution was saying no to everything. Until Obama went and banged the door of the Chinese leader who was in Copenhagen, but chose not to participate in this dangerous meeting of people who were responsible together. And it led to the 2-degree decision in the late night. So, but I'm telling the story because it illustrates many important things. Leaders of governments have to take charge of necessary decisions that we need to make together. They cannot leave it to others, to bureaucrats, or to some kind of destiny. No, they have to take charge. But what they did manage was this important goal that was set, and that, in fact, the Chinese leader agreed to the 2-degree temperature as a maximum goal. Now, you know that the IPCC's working group has shown that what is happening now is that given the level of current emissions, we are headed for a 4-degree temperature increase or worse by 2100. This was, of course, 2 degrees by 2050 is what they decided. But we are not on the right trend yet. And we know that 4 degrees would be catastrophic for life on Earth. So clearly we need to do more and fast. As hard as it is to believe, there remains a substantial community of people in this country and sometimes elsewhere who doubt or deny the science of climate change. There are many reasons for this, I believe, not all of them susceptible to rational argument. One of the most powerful are fear, but also the degree of impact of using a lot of money to try to counter realities. Using money to skew what people read, see, and hear. And that's been going on now for the last 20 years, building up people's skepticism and questioning the reality of the science. But the fear is there to be inspired in people. Our comfortable lifestyles and fear also of what they feel is intrusive government or an action to dictate consumer behavior. All of these aspects are partly there. But while there may be policy debate about the best response to climate change, the science, you can do in different ways, but the science is clearer than ever, and I hope you will all be leaders as scientists and technical experts and otherwise to make that point as clearly and effectively as you can. Working with the United Nations Foundation and supported by a Danish company, we are trying to help the IPCC scientists conveying the messages, speaking in ways that people can understand when the reports, this one and the next one, are being delivered, to try to prevent and avoid what happened in the last round, which was really a tragedy, because people were able to spend money and other efforts to undermine the IPCC in ways that we cannot afford. I am frequently asked, why are we not succeeding in changing our ways and building a sustainable future? Is the reason political, social, or technical? Well, I believe it's all three. We are facing a challenge that is larger than our present system of governance are able to easily address and act upon in most countries around the world, and certainly among the countries of the world. The same failures of governance that have produced the recent political and economic turmoil across the globe are also behind our inability, I think, so far to set an environmentally sustainable and socially equitable course for our common future. So all of us, young and old, must work to promote a greater sense of shared responsibility, not only as citizens of our respective countries, but as equal members of an increasingly interconnected global community. A greater sense of shared responsibility is essential to prepare for a future that is safer, more prosperous, and more secure. The traditional separation between the public and private sector that I talked about is becoming increasingly irrelevant as our societies realize how interdependent we all are in a world of mounting common challenges and threats. Not just the public and voluntary sectors, but also the business community must be socially and globally responsible. Because we will all benefit from the many large and small decisions taken by businesses that do look beyond the short term and choose investments and solutions for the future. These are the actors and innovators we will see succeed. These will prove to be the heroes, I think, of the younger generation and the students who are working here at Stanford and other universities. So basically, although there are difficult challenges, I still remain optimistic at an age of 74. The energy technologies you are discussing in this symposium, ones that are efficient, environmentally benign, and cost-effective when deployed on a large scale, end of quote, offers a lifeline to the world. Billions of people, even in developing countries, are now socially connected by technologies that have shrunk the world and expanded the notion of a global neighborhood. That was not the case back in 1987 when the report came. It gives new optimism about the ability we have to make the necessary changes. It is enabling change to occur more rapidly, even as technology makes possible a radical transformation of how we produce and deliver energy services. I also believe that we now understand more than ever the need to sense, to reflect, to analyze, and act based on a holistic approach, fully cognizant of how interdependent we all have become in our own societies, but also across the globe. Because frankly, as long as we all live on one planet, the same planet, we will have to make a safer future happen for all of us. Or it will not happen at all. We are so interdependent. And I believe we can do it because there is no alternative path ahead. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, we have some time for questions, so if you would raise your hand, and we have some people with mics. So, yeah.
Yeah, here's a question. So after the agreement with all the nations.
Please turn the mic up.
Maybe.
Yeah, so after the agreement between all the nations, how do we see that all the nations are proactively taking part in it, and what is the monitoring system?
Well, I mean, I mentioned one positive aspect of the bad results of the Copenhagen conference, because that decision that the world agreed on no more than 2-degree increase before 2050 still stands. However, the ability of the global community to come together and agree on a global deal on climate is still lacking. So there are several pessimistic signs. However, I think more nations, more leaders are now aware that it is not enough for all developing countries, for instance, to point fingers at the rich countries and say, you solve the problem, you fill the wastebasket, we still have the right to development, and we should be able to use fossil fuels like you have done. You know, in fact, this is the analysis we made back in '87, that fairness told us that it is the OECD countries, the rich countries that are polluting the most, that are the ones who have to take charge. But as the 30 years have, or nearly, have passed, gradually the emerging economies are leading the trends towards increasing pollution in a way that also increases the number of tons per person even in many of these countries. And there's no way anymore that it's enough to say, since I'm Chinese or Indian or Brazilian or something, I don't contribute to the change that is necessary. That doesn't work anymore. And these countries, I think, are gradually realizing that this is the case. So as we move towards 2015, where important new meetings in the climate negotiations are happening, they will happen on a broader basis where every country is ready to participate, not on an equal basis, because there are historical differences. However, that everyone has to be at the table and try to find solutions together. I believe there will be some positive breakthroughs in the coming years, given what has already happened in the later meetings in those negotiations. But we don't know. But meanwhile, many countries are doing things, such as China, doing things, or India for that sake, doing things based on the reality that our own country is already suffering from what's happening, and we need to do something to address those issues. So even saying no to international obligations, they do say yes to the obligations towards their own population. In the case of India or China, of course, that's more than 1 billion people in each case. So it counts in the global picture.
Great. Okay, another question. We've got one over here.
Well, thank you for your wise words. I haven't heard such here for a long time, just in America. I think in this country we have a hard time having our leadership make any kind of agreements because, of course, the oil and gas lobbies are so strong in this country. And until we get to a place here where we rein them in, cut the subsidies, and have a government of by and for the people, not the corporations, I don't know if we can get anywhere internationally. So I see the rest of the world's trying to get ahead and do things without the U.S. I'm wondering, do you have any suggestions how we can change public opinion and policies in this country? Because I think in a lot of ways we do lead the world.
You know, I should have mentioned to that last question that I said the developing countries used to and still say, you fill the wastebasket, you have to sort it out. And they certainly have been pointing fingers to the U.S., the biggest polluter, was the biggest polluter, and still is one of the two biggest in national terms. of course, as long as the US, Australia, and Canada, or whoever is not even signing up and agreeing to the Kyoto Protocol, that is not acceptable to any one of us. The thing that is a positive sign, after all, here, is that the Obama administration has decided to use the authority of the EPA and others to do things even without international agreements and even without a change in the US legislation towards dealing with climate change in a sensible way. But I have to say it's hard for someone. I have known the US since I was a young child, coming here with my parents. When I was 10 years old, I went to public school in Brooklyn when I was 10 to 11. And I then came to Harvard School of Public Health when I was 25 and met students from across the world. So I followed the US, and I have always believed that in the end the US will come along and do the right thing. But I have to say that since 2011, when your Congress was not able to, together with the executive branch, to stop America from being taken away the AAA rating, since then I have lost my confidence in your political system. Until then, I said to people, wait and see, something will happen before that date, because the US is not going to sit still losing the AAA rating. But it didn't happen. I was wrong. And now you are in the middle of the next round of government shutdown and stupidities that are unbelievable to people outside. So, but then, it's hard. When you have a constitution and a history like yours, and you have a separation between the parties like you have gradually over the years gone into, it's hard to rewind this situation. So, but I'm sure more and more of the real political leaders of this country in both parties are aware that things cannot continue this way. And I also think you need you have Supreme Court judges who are making wrong decisions. And those Supreme Court judges have been appointed by different administrations where even, in my country, kind of the Supreme Court is untouchable in a certain way. It's neutral, and it acts neutrally, objectively. Yours is a political institution. The Supreme Court, even. And maybe I should stop, telling, but I met one of those judges when I received the Jefferson Medal, like 3 years ago, I guess. He was one of the others, Judge Scalia. He was one of the two. We were 3 people receiving that award. We were in Virginia receiving it, and it was a fantastic experience. But the thing that stays with me is Judge Scalia, as he spoke at the dinner event after those awards, and he spoke after me. And I had been making, reflections about Thomas Jefferson in his own house there, where we were having dinner, that he, the scientist, he had that kind of training and mind. He could not understand 200 years ago that the thinking he had about development of resources, natural resources, taking, charge, making new agricultural products, everything that he was doing, he could have no clue about the sum of human activities as time went by, and we are now 150, 200 years later. Because now global warming is real, and I spoke in normal terms like this. And then he spoke after me and said, there is no global warming. Yeah. He said that to this dinner party of 45 people. And he went on, explaining why there was no global warming. And I can tell you, these were academics, most of them, around, and they were shaking their heads and getting, I could see. And the people at my round table said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, that this man is saying such terrible things. It's really inappropriate." And I said, "Shh, I'm listening. I'm learning." I said, "This is interesting." I took it as a challenge. Now, then the professor who was my the person receiving me in Virginia University, when this dinner was over, Scalia rose, and he left without saying goodbye to me or to Warner, who was the other recipient. He just moved out of the room, and this man rose at my table, went after him. And I thought, what's going to happen? He was so furious. So I sneaked behind him, not close up, but because I was curious, what's going to happen? 50 meters behind him, and I was standing in the door of the Monticello, yeah. And there was a black limousine picking up Scalia. So he went into the car. I saw it from the door. The professor, went up and banged the windows of the car. And first it looked as if Scalia was going to drive without opening the window, but he rolled down the window. And I heard him in loud voices speaking to Scalia. He came back and told me the following story. He said, who are you to treat our foreign visitor in this way? And she said, that was it. "I'm not going to have a woman from Norway telling me what to think." That was his first response. And then he said, "But the president says that global warming is real." Because that January, in the State of the Union address, George Bush had acknowledged for the first time this is a major problem and that one had to deal with it. And he said, "George Bush is a fool." And he rolled up the window and drove. So, I leave to you to try to find out how to improve the American scene. Thank you.